All right, so chapter 9, integrity and wrongdoing. You know, I think as student PTAs, you have all displayed good integrity and have a desire to be ethical. But we're going to talk about some situations like when potentially you might be tempted to do wrong, all right? I kind of, I don't even know how I feel about the opening case of misassigning an aide where Margaret uses her aide Dwayne, who's in PT school, to do evals. You know, it's obviously not showing integrity. It's not even legal. But, you know, you just kind of read through that and you go, wow, how does she end up there? That the temptation is real, okay? So hopefully we can all use appropriate decision making if and when we find ourselves in times of temptation to act with integrity. So here's a couple of definitions for you. First up from Webster's Dictionary, integrity means adhering to moral principles or honesty, the quality of being unimpaired or soundness, unity and wholeness. And then from the core values of the APTA, integrity is a steadfast adherence to high ethical principles or professional standards, truthfulness, fairness, doing what you say you will do, and speaking forth about why you do what you do. I love that. Here's a quote from the U.S. Air Force. I didn't put it up on the slide, but it's also a good one to think about. Professional integrity derives its substance from the fundamental goals or mission of the profession. When professions go beyond their essential service function to society and distort their purpose toward profits, power, or greed, then they lose the trust and respect of their communities. They stop being professions. I think we want to look at areas of temptation when we're leaning towards wanting to make a profit or needing power or greed. All right. So some specific areas of wrongdoing that your chapter 9 goes into talks about harassment, substance abuse, fraud, when federal or state statutes are being violated. Next week, we'll look more specifically at when to blow the whistle on when these things are happening, and also mandatory reporting. Okay, so harassment, sexual harassment, I want you to consider like this idea of quid pro quo, you know, something for something. You do this, I'll give you that. Sexual harassment is unwelcome sexual advances, requests, or other sexual conduct that are made as a condition of employment, promotion, getting a pay raise, or other job benefit. Now, a hostile work environment, on page 118, we look at the case, it's 9.2 of Sandra, who's working with all male colleagues who, you know, their talk makes her uncomfortable. They're talking about their sexual exploits and what's going on the weekend and whatnot. So a hostile work environment is defined by the Equal Employment Opportunity Council, considering what a reasonable person would consider offensive. All right. So in a hostile work environment, there are unwelcome sexual advances, requests, or other sexual conduct that may reasonably interfere with work performance or create an intimidating or offensive workplace. Now, the standards of talking next about harassment of patients. The standards of ethical conduct, it's actually 4F that I'll read it to you. It says, physical therapist assistants shall not engage in any sexual relationship, that's 4E, with any of their patients, clients, supervisees, or students. Okay, and physical therapist assistants shall not, this is 4F, shall not harass anyone verbally, physically, emotionally, or sexually. All right, so you're not going to do it. Okay, and then the Washington Administrative Code actually put a reference sheet in your module this week for all the laws with their numbers to look up. WAC 246-915-182 talks about unprofessional conduct. Page 119 of your text discusses having a romantic relationship with a patient and how that's considered harassment. But we also have harassment by patients, probably a far more common problem than harassment of patients is harassment by patients. I will tell you, through my 17 years of therapy, I have experienced this, both mild and moderate harassment, sexual harassment by patients. It happens, okay? So page 120 of our text talks about this. Now, a mild harassment, sexual harassment by a patient could include sexual suggestion, sexual innuendo, maybe requests for dates. Moderate includes deliberate touching and specific propositions, and severe then would be forced fondling or assault. So, yeah, I've had many patients, with presenting for sexual innuendo. Actually, I've had a couple times being asked out for coffee, and those would be like mild, okay? Moderate, though, deliberate touching. Yes, I've actually been kissed twice by patients. Once I was doing some manual traction, and I think that people are so grateful to be feeling better. Is one thing that kind of goes in there too. And a lot of times people haven't had that experience of hands-on therapy before. Maybe this is the first time that somebody is listening to them, touching them, helping them feel better. I'm not saying it's okay, but I am saying that I can see how it kind of maybe the idea takes root in a patient's mind. Anyway, so I was doing some manual traction, and this male patient just kind of pulled my head down and kissed me right on the lips. And I just pulled back up. I'm like, okay, we're going to be done now. Short treatment that day. Anyway, not something that was comfortable by any means, but I can almost guarantee you will experience something along these lines. Both male and female patients potential fall into this area, okay? So just act with integrity and absolutely document, okay? Next up, substance abuse. So your text goes into a very interesting debate on privacy regarding recreational drug use versus strict laws on drug use and mandatory testing in the workplace. In the long run, professionals abusing drugs is a means for grounds of suspension of your license, okay? And also, we want to consider just creating a safe environment for patients. So there's definite dangers to patients if professionals are involved in using drugs, okay? So obviously, if you are high as a professional, your perceptions will be, your normal perceptions will be altered. Potentially you could harm a patient, okay? And mandatory drug testing is often required in workplaces, okay? So I would say this, if your text has a couple of good case studies. 121, I think, talks about a nurse who was taking narcotics from her patients. Anyway, you are going to document all of the things that you notice and see. Talk to your supervisor and consult with other healthcare professionals as appropriate, okay? So document is my best advice that I can give you if you are witnessing somebody abusing a illegal substance. So, let me ask you this question too, just as you're thinking through this. Is the user of the substance a wrongdoer who needs to be reported, or is the user a victim of a sickness who needs help? That's kind of where the debate in your text, those two sides of the question is what your text debates. Okay, so you can look at standards of ethical conduct 4C, 5D, and 5E when we are looking at substance abuse. 4C, physical therapist assistants shall discourage misconduct by healthcare professionals and report illegal or unethical acts to relevant to the relevant authority when appropriate. 5D states PTAs shall encourage colleagues with physical, psychological, or substance-related impairments that may adversely impact their professional responsibilities to seek assistance or counsel. So we'll encourage our colleagues that are involved with these impairments to seek assistance or counsel. And then 5E states that PTAs who have knowledge that a colleague is unable to perform their professional responsibilities with reasonable skill and safety shall report this information to the appropriate authority. All right, fraud and abuse. So fraud is intentional misrepresentation of eligibility for services or of services rendered, or charges for treatments that are not needed or are excessive. You can look at standard 4A here, which states that PTAs shall provide truthful, accurate, and relevant information and shall not make misleading representations. So you're not going to practice as a PTA if you're not a licensed PTA, okay? And 4B states that PTAs shall not exploit persons over whom they have supervisory, evaluative, or other authority. And obviously we're not evaluating patients like for the initial eval, but we definitely are assessing them for sure. For example, patients, clients, students, supervisees, other research participants, or employees potentially. And that's standard 4B. And standard 7D states that PTAs shall ensure that documentation for their interventions accurately reflects the nature and extent of the services provided. That relates to the second bullet. There it is absolutely considered fraud to overbill. Now, I have tried to make this clear when I was teaching you guys 101 last year, that the codes need to match absolutely what you're billing for, and that all of your treatment time needs to be accounted for because of the potential to be considered fraud. Okay. Now, some violations of statutes that are these could be considered fraud. Okay, so HIPAA has a clause in it that states that kickbacks for goods, services, or referrals are prohibited under HIPAA. And our Practice Act, of course, we want to have our license up to date. We want to do our documentation accurately and timely. And of course, we're not operating outside the scope of our Practice Act. So we're just doing, we're responsible for knowing what's in our Practice Act and practicing within it. Okay. So all of those could be considered, areas of wrongdoing, and violations of those appropriate or those statutes. Okay, page 123 in your text talks about the HIPAA conditions. So why do some therapists do wrong? Like I said, I honestly believe that we're trying to act with integrity. We hopefully start out that way. There can be some social explanations for this or some character explanations for why people tend to do wrong. So maybe a person has socially some outside pressures that are creating temptations, right? Perhaps so that I think is kind of self-explanatory, but maybe within their character, they tend to have bad preferences. So bad preferences are morally harmful intentions and undesirable desires. And maybe a lack of self-control, a lack of sufficiently strong moral motivation to do what you know is right because it's right. And moral indifference, lack of concern for the well-being of others. Perhaps they're disillusioned, burned out, overwhelmed, okay? Don't want to apply the principles that they know are morally right to their own life, okay? Just a little bit on whistleblowing here. Check out WAC 246-15. Again, it's -15-020, okay? 246-15-020. Sorry, I missed that 020 up there. for the rights and responsibilities on whistleblowing. Okay, so by definition, whistleblowing is an action by employees who identify what they believe to be a significant moral problem concerning their company, who convey information about the problem outside the approved organizational channels, or against strong pressure from colleagues not to do so, and with the intent of notifying persons in a position to act. Okay, so here's the WAC. A person who is in good faith communicates a complaint or information is immune from civil liability on claims based upon that communication. Okay, is entitled to recover costs and reasonable attorney's fees incurred in establishing the defense, and is afforded the protections and remedies of the Human Rights Commission, and the department, that is the Department of Health, will refer whistleblowers expressing concern about reprisal or retaliation to the Human Rights Commission. Okay, and the Department of Health will protect the identity of the whistleblower by revealing it only to the appropriate departmental staff or disciplining authority member by court order, or if the complaint is not in good faith. So standards of ethical conduct, letter 4C, says that PTAs shall discourage misconduct by healthcare professionals and report illegal or unethical acts to the relevant authority when appropriate. So whistleblowing can be internal or external. Page 124 of your text talks about these. Can be open or anonymous. So internal whistleblowing is when information is conveyed to higher authorities within the organization. And external is when information is conveyed to authorities outside the organization. Okay, so internally, maybe you go to your, say you notice a colleague is doing something wrong, and you would internally go to your boss at your place of work. Okay, externally would be maybe when you would go to authorities higher up, like reporting it to the Department of Health. Okay. Open versus anonymous. Open, you identify yourself, and anonymous, obviously, partially anonymous, or fully anonymous report. There are some considerations that you want to take into account for when to report. Permissible whistleblowing is so when the public is at risk for serious harm, you're going to report your concerns to a supervisor, or when you exhaust other channels for solving the problem within the organization. Okay, and obligatory whistleblowing is when you have documented evidence that would convince reasonable parties that your view of the situation is correct, and there's good reason to believe that the whistleblowing will lead to solving the problem. Again, check out page 124 of your text for more explanations on that, and we'll look more at that next week also. Okay, so when is it required to report? So we're going to report child abuse, we're going to report elder abuse, and we're going to report domestic violence. So page 128 of your text talks about child abuse. It gives these bullet points as to what can be considered child abuse: physical abuse, child neglect, neglecting their basic needs. Can also be physical, educational, or emotional. Okay, sexual abuse or emotional abuse. Page 130 of your text talks about elder abuse. Is domestic elder abuse as compared to institutional elder abuse. Can be physical, can be sexual, can be emotional or psychological. You're going to report neglect or abandonment, financial or material exploitation, or self-neglect even, which is refusal or failure to provide for basic needs. So mandatory reporting in child abuse, elder abuse situations, and domestic violence situations. So domestic violence is, or intimate partner violence, if you will. It's not just physical violence alone. It's any behavior that's intended to gain or maintain power and control over a spouse, partner, girlfriend, boyfriend, intimate family member. Abuse is a learned behavior. It's not caused by anger, mental problems, drugs, or alcohol, or other common excuses. There's a fabulous example in your, fib is probably not the right word. There's a really good example of a case study in your text that the PT discovers that his wife or his patient is being abused by her husband. Case 9.6. He starts to wonder, if he indeed did do the right thing by reporting it, all right? But it is required, okay? There's a few of the common ways abusers control their victims: by isolation, by using emotional abuse, using children against them, to try to dominate their finances, family resources, and their access to health care. So it could be to just physical violence, sexual violence, any psychological aggression, which is sometimes difficult to determine, and even stalking, okay? So definitely required mandatory reporting in all three of those situations. All right, gang, that is it for now. Have a good week.